You're listening to the 2018 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers Program. This session features Amber Rose and Fiona Summerfield in conversation with Nicola Galloway. Kia ora, good afternoon everyone. My name is Kerry Sunderland and I'm the coordinator of the Readers and Writers Program. And this is our final session for the 2018 program here in the Granary, so I'm so pleased you all came along. I want to say an extra big thank you to Page and Blackmore, our sponsor, and I am delighted now to hand over to Nicola Galloway, who's chairing this session, who will introduce our two panellists. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Kerry. All right, so welcome to the last session, as Kerry just said, of the Readers and Writers, where we've got Beyond the Plate as the subject. We're talking to Amber Rose and Fiona Summerfield, who are both writers. In this session, we're exploring food writing and cookbooks and how food is part of our culture within New Zealand. We have Amber Rose. She's visiting from Goat Island near Matakana in Northland. And after more than almost 2 decades living abroad, mostly in the UK, Amber has returned to her roots. While living and working overseas, one of her jobs, among many, we've discovered this morning, she was a private chef to celebrities, including Jude Law, Sadie Frost, and Gwyneth Paltrow. But that was just part of what you were doing. We'll talk more about that during the session. She's the author of the best-selling cookbook, Love, Bake, Nourish, and the Whole Food Pantry 2 years ago, 2016. And her third beautiful cookbook was released last month, The Wild Delicious. Amber is also known for being the daughter of respected organic seed-saving legend, I couldn't think of any other way to explain it, Kay Baxter, and spent her childhood growing up on the land and sea and surrounded by an incredible edible harvest. And then we have Fiona Summerfield as a freelance writer and contributing author to the Kind Culture Food Stories from Aotearoa. She has a background in journalism, contributing to many different publications, including daily newspapers, trade and children's magazines, and was the recipient of the New Zealand Society of Authors 2016 Complete Manuscript Assessment Program. Fiona and her husband operated Summerfield's Foods, a specialty food in Elam, Christchurch, prior to the earthquakes, and in late 2015 they moved to a 3-acre property in the Lower Moutere to begin their journey towards self-sufficiency. So definitely some beautiful crossovers with the food and gardening. So Fiona, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal approach to food and cooking. You obviously are passionate about self-sufficiency. Could you share a little bit of your story of how you've come to this place of, from Christchurch to Nelson?
So we've always cooked and also always cooked recipes from all over the world. And in Christchurch, we were getting frustrated visiting all the little different shops to get what we needed. So we decided there needed to be a shop with everything in one place. And so that's why we decided, well, no one else was doing it. We kept waiting. And so then we did it ourselves. And so, yeah, we had Summerfield's Foods, and it was really great. And through that, we got to meet some really neat people, including Adrian, who I interview in Kind Culture from Geraldine. She supplied us with her free-range eggs, and numerous other people. And with the earthquakes, we had an online shop, and we ended up having to shut the retail shop and went completely online, which meant we could do free delivery all around Christchurch, which worked well when the roads were knackered. We had a little scooter and we could scooter over the humps and deliver things. And then for other reasons, actually, we ended up coming to Nelson, and our plan was always to get back into the food game, but in a different way. And that's when we started looking for a property that we could but use as our base and to start growing our own food from. We had a very small property in Christchurch, and we did the 3-foot gardening. We do the little squares, and it's amazing. We ate more tomatillos than we could eat off that. And I'm slightly nervously going to plant tomatillos again this year, and I'm just worried now we've got more space. We may be swimming in tomatillos forever. So, yeah, that's where we're at.
Great. So Amber, obviously you had an amazing upbringing in regards to eating well and organic gardening. Can you tell us how this has shaped your journey of cooking and how you've ended up working around the world and that whole story behind that?
Yeah, so I guess from as young as I can sort of remember, my well, it wasn't really my approach, but it was how I was brought up through circumstantial. So I guess when I was little, I've always been interested in cooking, and I was always helping Mum in the kitchen and in the garden. And if I wanted to bake, which I loved baking when I was a little girl, I had to go out into the orchard to see what fruit was available, to create a pudding or a cake or something around that, what was available, what fruit or berries or what have you. And the same with the savoury food. So if by the time I was kind of 8, 9 or 10, I was helping to cook the family dinners, and we would go out into the garden and see what produce was there, the courgettes or the carrots or the cabbages or beautiful greens for the salad. So from Dot, that was how our kitchen worked. It was you had to go out and look in the garden or the orchard to see what there was, and then base your meal around that, which is kind of the exact opposite to how in these modern times we've come to approach food, where most people who shop at the supermarket, including myself quite a lot of the time, you think, oh, what do you want for dinner tonight? And you find a recipe and then you go and buy those ingredients. So having grown up, it was the exact opposite, where you had to base a meal around what was available, and then those were your limitations. So I think that has massively, from such a young age, has massively influenced how I've continued that throughout my life, even when I haven't had my mum's garden to forage in, or shelves to raid. I was always getting in trouble for opening a jar of pickles and finishing the whole thing, and no one else got a look in. So that's, having grown up with that approach to food has massively impacted how I cook for my family and how I end up writing my books. And especially with this one, I've written the chapters how I experienced food growing up, so from the sea or from the orchard or from the garden, rather than breakfast, lunches and dinners. It's divided into those chapters, which the real kind of behind the scenes drive to do that was not only how I experienced food growing up, but to try and connect people back to the origin of their food sources. So due to the reason of we all shop at the supermarket, or most people shop at the supermarket to buy their food, but I think people forget that food doesn't come from the supermarket. It comes from the land, or it comes from the sea, or from a farm, or from the wild. And so writing the recipes and creating them into those particular chapters hopefully will encourage people to connect back to their food sources and where it actually comes from, and to think about food in a more seasonal way.
Lovely. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you there. So just staying on that, you mentioned just a little bit how you do food writing sort of from this place. How did this experience for you growing up and then working within food, how did this lead to food writing? How did you end up, writing books?
So I've always had a huge passion for food. I have always been interested in food ever since I was a tiny, tiny little girl. Like, even before I could kind of cook things, I was always out foraging in Mum's garden, and I loved, finding the sweet little strawberries and filling my pockets with all the strawberries, and usually got in trouble for that too, because no one else got any strawberries. Or climbing up the peach tree and getting all the ripe peaches before all my brothers got a look in. It's like, Amber, have you been up the peach tree again? Or even wild things, like I loved collecting tōtara berries, and I used to go to school with these little containers. They'd be like, what are you eating? And I'd be like, nothing, just my little fairy berries. So I've always loved food, and the adventure of it, the pleasure of it, the collecting of it, the cooking of it, the gathering of it, even the preparing of it. But funnily enough, I never really wanted to be a chef. I don't know why. It never kind of, I think, unless you're like a top chef and getting to completely create your own menus and be super creative, you're always confined to cooking somebody else's ideas and somebody else's food, so I don't know, it just never really appealed to me. But having grown up in rural New Zealand at the time, the only 2 cookbooks on my mum's shelves were the Amarita cookbook and the Edmonds cookbook, with it's a real Kiwi classic, but those pages of orange food I didn't really know that you could have this whole other career. But all the things that I've done in between then and now have all had a similar theme of kind of nurturing and looking after people. And I've kind of been one of those people that throughout my life I've followed my nose a little bit and haven't necessarily planned this whole long career. I didn't go down the university route. So I've kind of followed my nose and ended up training in like herbal medicine, and then I did massage, and then I had a son and had a very difficult experience after he was born, and that inspired me to train as a doula to be able to support other mothers through that process, because I felt that being nourished with good food and having the right support people around you, even a stressful situation, can be pulled back into, line very quickly and just make that process into motherhood a more beautiful, nourished, celebrated experience. And it was through training as a doula that I met a lady who she was only my second case study when I trained as a doula, and she wanted to get into food photography because she was an interior stylist and very creative, and part of my doula package of looking after new mums was I would cook for them. So she was like, wow, you're such a great cook. Have you ever thought of being a food stylist? And I was like, no, I didn't even know what that was. I was like, this sounds intriguing. So I went and started assisting one of her friends who was a very good London-based food stylist. And in the meantime, I carried on my doula work, and it was kind of crazy. I'd be going to a hospital to check on one of my new mum clients with a roll of kitchen knives in my bag, hoping that they didn't detect me through the metal detectors, going, oh my God, why is this lady coming into a birthing suite with a roll of kitchen knives? Anyway, so I'm juggling the two jobs, and became very good friends with Ali, who was one of my second case studies as a doula, and we started doing test shoots together for food styling. I would cook beautiful food and she would photograph it for her portfolio. And then in the meantime, I was also Ali's sister's doula and helped her have a baby. And Sophie, Ali's sister, was an editor at a publishing company. And then we got chatting, and they asked me if I wanted to write a healthy baking book for their publishing company. And and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, of course. What an amazing thing to be offered. And that was how Love, Bake, Nourish, my first book, came about. So I hadn't kind of intended to go down that route, because I didn't really know about food styling and that you could have a whole career in cookery books and food styling and all that stuff. But it just kind of opened up. It found me. Yeah.
That's a great story. I like it, yeah. And that book went on to be a bestseller on Amazon?
It got into the top 10 overall books on Amazon in the UK, and was a bestseller in lots of countries.
Yeah. Great. Well, Fiona, so clearly you're both passionate about healthy food and cooking, but you write about many subjects, including food. And how did you get the involvement with the Kind Culture book? How did that come about?
Yeah, because I guess like food, like cooking from everywhere, I like doing different types of writing from all different things. And I joined the Free Range Press, which is a really neat cooperative way of printing in this, when everything's changing in the whole publishing industry. And I just really loved the idea in their earlier books where they get a whole lot of different people together and they publish books that other people might not, but I think are really important to have published. And so this one came along. Emma, who's the editor on it, had been discussing food stories in Christchurch. I'd already shifted up here at that time, and so I said to her, hey, I love this idea. Can I help with you, with this? And so we talked about it and talked about what chapter to write. And because we were on this journey of growing all our own vegetables and going out into food and chickens and everything, meat and things, that's what we decided to write it on. And so, in terms of this chapter, I do a lot of interviewing of other people that I know that are much better at this than me, because we're just starting out. But it's that story, and I think that's the thing when we talk about with like buying at the supermarket, you're getting only part of the story, and I think that's why people love the self-sufficiency idea, because you get the whole story, and it's just like a book. You can read the end, and that's kind of cool, but if you've read the whole book, you really feel like you've got something out of it. And yeah, so it's those parsnips that you have on your plate, you're like, yeah, I was worried about you, and earlier on you're looking a bit dodge, and you've made it, and you taste really yummy. So yeah, I think it's just, it all comes back to stories. We love stories as humans, I think.
Yeah, and that's what this book really is in a way.
Absolutely.
It's a collection of stories or essays, and then recipes as well. So did you have much contact with other contributors? So when you say you joined Free Range Press, so did you know the other contributors, or was it you didn't actually see the whole lot until it was finished? Or
No, I didn't see the other. I knew what some of the chapters, but I didn't. I hadn't met the other authors on this one, because each of the books has different people that write for it. And I guess the idea also behind is it's kind of a catalyst for discussion, and I just love it because every chapter or essay is a new story about someone passionate about some aspect of food, and it's just, it's kind of, I found it a really, in today's world where everything seems to be going a little bit crazy, quite a hope-filled book. Like every chapter, you're like, oh man, that's really cool, they're doing this, and then, oh, these guys are doing that, and it's great. And I did meet a lot of them, obviously, when it was launched, and that was fascinating. I got to try some of the insects, the insect people that grow them on. And they're really tasty, it wasn't like that freaky, ooh, I'm going to eat an insect. They'd make them as a little crumb, and it was on, hors d'oeuvres, and it was delicious.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if I came across that one.
We'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
I'm not dead, so no, it's all good.
Okay. So both the books are very much an ode to New Zealand food, which is, in a way, what we want to talk about in this session. So let's start looking into that. Amber, how does New Zealand cuisine, or New Zealand Kai and cuisine, how do you think it presently is looking? Where are we at in the whole food scene in New Zealand at the moment?
Yes. Well, I feel like as such a young nation, we're still finding our feet with it a little bit. And it's been really interesting, actually. I've had quite a few discussions with my mum, who's saved heritage seeds and is an incredible collector of those stories. Like, oh my goodness, some of the stories. So I've been talking to her about a few ideas that we've been, that are in a bit of a developmental stage, and just getting some of the stories from her of different areas of New Zealand that have been colonized by people from different areas of the world, and like some of the Italians with the tomatoes down in Wellington, and the gum diggers from Bosnia and Serbia up in Northland, and what they bought, and the fruit trees, and then some of the French fruit trees, and it's so amazing what we have here. But I think that there's so many things that influence food. There's culture, there's politics, there's farming, there's availability, there's different levels of financial means to be able to buy food can influence obviously influences what you eat, and what you cook, what you can afford to cook, what you can afford to buy. So there's so many things, and I feel like as such a young nation, I feel like it's tricky. I feel like we're still finding our feet with kind of bringing so many different cultures together, even the Asian cultures, and then the traditional Māori culture, and all the Pacific Islands. There's so many different things that influence what we currently have, and I feel like we're still all learning to bring that together and hold on to some of those traditions, but how we carry that forward is, again, a different thing in itself. I feel like there's obviously trends as well that influence what we eat and how we eat. Like the whole plant-based food movement at the moment is quite a big thing, which personally I feel is quite politically driven. It's in flux, I think. Yeah. But I also feel like you go back 2 generations and almost everyone would have had a vegetable garden and everyone had fruit trees and they would harvest that fruit and grow those vegetables and save their seed and carry it on. But with the introduction of convenience and supermarkets has massively changed what we prepare, how we approach food, how we shop. You know, we've lost a lot of our food roots, I think. And I think that, but as a nation, I think we're incredibly innovative and forward-thinking, and we love supporting and connecting to stories, and we love boutique businesses, and there's so many startups in New Zealand, like of boutique breweries, little cheese companies, like people really love that, and I think customers respond to that really well. Like they love the human element in the story. So even though with the explosion of supermarkets and convenience and the severing of those food routes, we're still somehow clinging on to something that is really positive. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next 10 or 20 years with all these boutique companies and the conversations that are starting to happen around food and culture and the bringing together of different cultures and how we carry that forward.
Definitely. Do you want to add anything to that, Fiona? With you know, how does our the food scene, the cuisine in New Zealand look, and how, you know, where are we heading with it?
I guess when we had our shop, we talked to Simo, who's a Moroccan chef, and he said always felt we were very fortunate in New Zealand, because he said in Morocco everything was Moroccan, but he said here you have everything and you have a massive choice. And I think we are very good at taking everybody's little bits, and we have been for quite some time. You know, recipes came back with World War II. I mean, they may be called weirdo things, but if there's recipes that my grandmother, when you actually look at what it is, it's like, oh, that's that Tunisian recipe from that Tunisian recipe book, because that's where Granddad had been, you know, like. But he brought it back and she worked out what it was and she made it and called it eggs and tomatoes or something. But, you know, like, actually it's the same recipe. I guess probably the most exciting thing for me at the moment is and a number of stories are in Kind Culture actually about the Māori food, and starting to go back and really producing a decent line of all those foods so that we can have restaurants that are, because you have to have that first before you can have the restaurants, you've got to have the food. And so that's been building, and Pacifica and the appreciation of that food culture, which I think in the past we've probably dumped on a bit. And so that's, I guess, that's probably more exciting for me at the moment, where those sorts of trends are going, and
Yeah,
to that sort of and the appreciation, I guess, of food culture that was already here, but was kind of trampled over.
Yeah, as you say, you know, a couple of decades, we go back a couple of decades, we all grew our own food, and the food has changed, I think, in that time, and how much more we can access. But it's exciting to see, you know, what's going to happen, and but we can cook anything. We don't have, you know, in other cultures they have this, you know, say Italian or Indian, they have this century-old cuisine that they've cooked, and we don't really have that. We're sort of using a little bit of everything and pulling it all together. So it's exciting to see where that's going to head. And I think also, I think you touched on it a little bit, is sustainability. This is really coming to the forefront. And how do you see this becoming part of our food culture, or is it already in New Zealand?
Yeah, so it's something that I've been really thinking a lot about recently, actually, because I do choose to eat meat and dairy and vegetables and fruit. I don't necessarily exclude any particular thing from my diet, and I feel like in our current food climate, there's so many different trends and so much research that comes out about various things, and we have like global news, you know, one thing that, like a study that comes out in Germany, suddenly it's had like 20 million views and everyone's like, oh my God, coconut oil is like pure poison, or 1 minute it's a superfood, and it's kind of, no one like knows what to believe anymore, you know, it's like, what the heck? So, and also I think as humans, we want to categorize things into black and white. Like, is meat good for you? You know, a new study comes out, meat increases cancer, whatever. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's like these topics are not black and white. There is no yes or no answer, because actually the question that's being asked is not correct. It's not, is meat good or bad for you? It's, well, what kind of meat are you eating? How is that meat grown? How is that meat produced? And it's not, is farming good or bad? It's like, well, how are you farming? You know, and there are farms that are occurring in New Zealand and also over in America, polyface farms, Joel Salatin. We've got Roebuck Farm in New Zealand with Jody and Tanya, who are doing incredible things. And I went to a talk that my mum did recently, and it pulled a whole lot of things into place for me, and I was able to put it's kind of a whole lot of things slotted into place. I was like, okay, now I get it. So she was talking about farming and growing produce and vegetables, and how we need to start growing things in a regenerative way. And so, you know, you've got this whole plant-based food movement happening at the moment, and everyone's like, oh my God, you're evil because you eat meat and dairy, and veganism is the only way to save the planet. But if you have a whole 100 acres of cabbages and broccoli and carrots and parsnips and turnips and whatever vegetable you want, but if that is grown in a degenerative farming system, you are still depleting the topsoil, you are releasing carbon into the atmosphere, you're having to kill all the rabbits and the pests and everything that are trying to eat the vegetables, so there's still death occurring, and you are still creating or contributing to climate change. But if you farm and grow vegetables and meat in a regenerative way that produces healthy topsoil, you're supporting the natural ecological system of animals, plants, nature in the way that it has been forever, then you're creating a healthy system. And not only are you creating a healthy system, but if you grow meat and vegetables in that regenerative way, you're actually pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, you're growing topsoil, you're supporting a healthy ecosystem. And so I feel like the questions that are being posed to people are not actually, it's like, not is meat good or bad for you? Is the plant-based movement good or bad? It's like, how are these things being grown? You know, so, yeah. So yes, sustainability, food.
But I don't think that's quite how people are approaching sustainability in New Zealand,
No.
Unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, that's
no.
I'm
Yeah.
totally there with you,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think sustainability is more about low waste and about, you know, say in restaurants and how they're approaching it, but that's really what we should be talking about is more...
Yes, but there are some interesting things coming. I was also having a chat to Lorraine Jacobs the other day, and she said there's a whole new booklet coming out that it's not about how many hats you have as a restaurant or how many Michelin stars you have, it's how sustainable your restaurant is, and whether you're growing your own food and how eco-friendly your restaurant is, I think. Is that
It's
kind
called
of...
Truth, Love and Clean Cutlery? Is that right? Thank
Yeah,
you.
and so they give
Yeah.
give restaurants ratings on how sustainable they are, and I know, amazing, right? And it's global. And she had to put forward 10 of the best ones from New Zealand. But what was so encouraging was she said it was really hard to choose because there's so many more than 10. And I was like, woohoo, that is awesome.
I
That's
think she
so
got
good
15
to hear.
in the end.
Yeah, yeah, they gave her an
Yeah.
extra 5.
Yeah, 2, and then she got 5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
always pushing the boundaries. Yeah, so I think that, yeah, it's just, but it's, again, keeping those conversations going and keeping steering and asking the right questions and, yeah, keeping the topics going.
Yeah, great. I mean, I suppose sustainability and self-sufficiency have quite a few crossovers. So what's your thoughts on sustainability and the, you know, maybe just from for you, a self-sufficiency standpoint?
It's absolutely
Yeah.
what you're talking about. You know,
Right.
if you've got the mix, then everything feeds off itself. And that's totally the model that we're looking to follow. So, you know, your extra vegetables, they go to the chickens, and the idea is you also feed the chickens through, if you've got a cow, through the cow paddock after it's moved, so it eats all the bugs out. And it's all, it's a whole system.
Part
that
of a
runs-
regenerative system.
It runs
Yeah.
the whole system. It runs itself effectively, so it's less work supposedly as well. We'll see how that works out. But I think there's also, in terms of the discussion, it does need to be more nuanced than we always want to go the black and white, probably even more so the media, because then it creates conflict. But it is a more nuanced discussion we need to have, and probably even about the amounts. Like, yeah, it's cool to have chicken, but should we be eating it every night, you know? And, you know, you'd look back in the past and it was a special treat. And people had it on this day, or they cooked their roast on Sunday and then they had it cold. And, you know, those sorts of things. We were eating more meat these days. So sometimes it's just about the amount. And then, you know, there's the whole sugar thing, which I got kind of cross about to start with, and then I worked it out, because if you do eat a lot of processed food and you look at the packet, just about all of them had sugar in them. So yeah, your diet was really high in sugar. And so absolutely, I could see suddenly why people were cutting it out, because we obviously cook a lot of the stuff ourselves. I knew exactly how much sugar was in things. So I was kind of like, well, what's this whole sugar thing about? And so some of these things have developed because of what we're eating as well. But I think absolutely we just need to keep talking about it.
Definitely. Right, let's talk a bit more about food writing and cookbooks. Amber, I talked about this earlier and you had a quite good response about the future of cookbooks. There's so much free recipes online, everything's available free online. Are we going to continue to have cookbooks and print media 10 years down the track?
I blimmin' hope so.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, I've been back in New Zealand for about nearly 3 years now, and Amazon isn't such a huge thing here just because we're so far on the edge of the world. But having lived in the UK, Amazon is massive over there, and just before I was leaving, it may have been already implemented over there, I'm not sure, but there was a discussion that I caught wind of about Amazon wanting to do a subscription service, so you could pay, £9 a month or whatever it was, and you would have access on your whatever device you were on, your computer or your phone or your iPad or Kindle, and you had access to millions of books. So you just paid a monthly subscription like Spotify works or like Netflix. And I was devastated by that, because I was like, well, Spotify and all those streaming services are kind of the end of, suddenly all the music stores close down and everything, and the musicians get paid like so much less than they ever used to. It's just Spotify that makes all the money, and the same with Netflix and various things. So I was absolutely horrified to hear that. But then I heard that they weren't going to include cookbooks in the titles because people just love the physical thing of a cookbook. Like, it's one thing to read a novel or to read research books or nonfiction or whatever, but a cookbook is something that is so visual, like you eat with your eyes first. And so I was like, oh, okay, then, well, that's all right. Yeah, so I don't know if they did. So I do think that, yes, it will still be around because people have to eat. They have to eat 3 times a day, usually, sometimes more, if you're me, 5 or 6 times a day. So, yeah, I really do think that they will be around because it's such a visual, beautiful thing. I mean, I probably read cookbooks more than I do novels these days, but yeah, having a 2-year-old will do that.
Do you think there'll be a bit of a shift, though? I mean, both of these books, we have recipes, but we also have stories and information and much more. It's not just a cookbook where you just open it and it's just 100 recipes, all of a slightly different version of another one. I do feel like food, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Like with fashion, for example, 10, 20 years ago, there was like lots of different kinds of like fashion. You could be a goth, or you could be a hippie, or you could be a punk, or you could be a whatever. And then sort of as time has progressed, it's become more homogenized. But I feel like food is having its moment of different trends. Like you can be vegan, you can be full-on carnivore into cooking on fire and barbecues, or you can be, an omnivore, or you can be a, Ayurvedic thing, or you could be raw, or you can be, Western aid price or paleo. Yeah. There's all these kind of different labels. But I feel like globally, and even just on a national level, as we start to figure these things out and find our food roots as Kiwis again, or not again, but in a new way going forward, that
common sense, hopefully, will start to become more common. And so rather than feeling like we've got to put a label on something, it's actually becoming more about not is it plant-based, but is it natural and is it local, you know? Like, Nicola just took me through the local supermarket this morning with great pride and was showing me how there's like labels on the cheeses going, this was made within 200 kilometers, or, you know, there's like 5 different local cheese producers, and I just was so heartened by that. So hopefully it becomes more about that rather than about trying to put labels on things.
Yeah.
Because
Great.
as you say, you know, if you're going to be plant-based, but all your vegetables are coming from,
Or your protein powders. And
or your protein powders are coming
Yeah.
from some remote Peruvian jungle hillside, or your super grains are, you know, have become so expensive that the people from
locals.
the locals can't even afford to eat their own food anymore. You know, it's just madness. It's absolute madness.
It's not sustainable.
It's definitely not sustainable.
Do you have anything to add to that about the future of cookbooks?
I mean, I think in writing in general, it's undergoing a massive change at the moment. And that's just what happens. I think we just got to accept that. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot more voices out there than there ever has been. In some ways, it's a lot more democratic because the gatekeepers don't have quite the same position where before, you know, a publisher didn't like it, you know, it was gone. I guess at the moment, a thing that's quite hard is it does feel like there's that whole celebrity link. You know, first you become a star and then you can write your cookbook, where there's probably fantastic cooks that never get to write a cookbook because they don't happen to know the right person or whatever, or they haven't been on a reality TV show.
MasterChef or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. And so, but I think, you know, that's just what it is at the moment. And I guess we have a massive bookshelf. And I guess it was interesting that you say you eat with your eyes first, because if you look back we love collecting old recipe books. And they were just words. There were very, very few pictures. And there's some fantastic recipes in there. You're a little bit like, I don't quite know if this looks like it's supposed to because you have no picture. But it doesn't negate the recipe. So it's an interesting thing. And so I think they will always exist. We have a lot of recipe books that are just recipe books. We have ones that are interesting books just to read about food. We have reference ones about spices, about meat, you know, that we love, that we use actually a lot in terms of getting the reference information. So I think that as a genre, they will still exist. But I also use recipes off the internet, and they're fantastic. I love using grandma so-and-so's from somewhere that someone's bothered to put up, and it's a really great recipe. And in the past, you couldn't do that. So I think that it's exciting.
Maybe that feeds it. Maybe this having all this free content is still, you know, basically feeding the cookbook popularity, because cooking in general has become a lot more popular and well, visual. It becomes so visual.
I guess I get a little bit worried about the Instagram side of things. We've got to make it look really pretty, and I think food, we all have it. It should be fun, and you should be able to give it a go, and you know, it doesn't have to look necessarily picture perfect. But I think it's exciting.
Thinking about publishing, your Kai and Culture that you contributed to were published by an independent publisher called Free Range Press, who you mentioned earlier. Can you explain a little bit more about, you know, how they work? You know, what did you say they were? They're a collective, a cooperative.
Yeah.
So how does that work? Does that mean that a whole group of people own it, or how's it sustainable?
It is a group of people,
Yeah.
and they kind of have a board kind of thing that people get nominated to, but it is just a group of people who like interesting things, and they do a lot of crowdfunding when they want to get a book off the ground, so it'll appear on Pledge Me or something like that, or you can also, as a contributing writer, you might say, I don't want to get paid for this book, but I'll, you know, if it sells well, then I'll get a part of the profits, kind of thing. So they just use a whole lot of different models, depending on the one that they're working on at the time, really. Yeah.
So is it non-profit? Is it, or is there somebody
believe
sort of
so.
runs? Yeah. So because you said there was one woman in particular that
for this
has
book,
sort of driven
Emma
it.
edited this one, but there's a whole group of people that
Yeah.
are involved in different ways. Yeah.
And they're based in Christchurch as well. Yeah. So just a different way of, but yeah.
Also, one of the main guys is in Melbourne.
Okay. So it's
hooray for the internet.
a global. Yeah. Wonderful.
You can do these things.
So that's it. I mean, maybe that is the future of, you know, of the cookbook, is that they're still going to come, but instead of it being from, you know, your mainstream publisher that, you know, there's crowdfunding and there's self-publishing and there's cooperatives, and yeah, it was quite interesting to see, well, you told me that when we met up, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting, that's how it came about. And it also means, I think, that you can, you know, that Kayan culture is so full of interesting and different stories, which you probably wouldn't read if it was just one book from one author. It's a real collection of a whole mix of people's thoughts and ideas, which is very cool. Okay, so just to sort of wrap up a little bit, or at least we've got a bit of excerpt reading and some questions to come. And you've pretty much talked about it already, but I'd like to just hear a little bit more about your family's approach to cooking and sourcing local food, because we've already sort of established that's what you both are doing, and that was sustainable. You know, how are you sourcing your food? Are you working at farmers? Are you going to markets? Just, yeah, I'd love to just hear about how you source your delicious food in your life.
So I like to bandy the term foraging around a little bit. One can forage in one's fridge, or one can forage out in the wild, or one can forage at the farmer's market, or in your friend's cupboard. And yeah, I guess for me, having grown up in my mum's garden, really, there's always been an element of pleasure from such a young age. I'm a very visual person, so I would, Mum always had this collection of beautiful baskets that were hanging up in our porch, and I would choose which one I wanted and go out and make a whole kind of ordeal of picking whatever it was I needed to pick. Like it was always my job to go and get herbs for the herb tea as well. So my mum was given this beautiful Chinese teapot that sat in a specially made molded basket that was stuffed with straw and lined to keep the teapot warm for hours, and it really did. And so she'd be like, okay, herb tea after lunch, go out and pick the herbs. And I loved that because I'd go and pick a lavender flower and a rosebud and a bit of pineapple sage and lemon. It was, I got to pick the blends that I liked, and usually threw a few flowers in as well. And I would, arrange all the herbs and the flowers on this little basket beautifully, and so collecting and gathering was always such a big part for me from such a young age of cooking. And I've always tried to carry that through, even shopping in a supermarket. It's just taking the time to kind of, look at the avocados or the apples or whatever it is and figure out which variety you want or which apples look the best. So it's trying to weave in that sense of joy and pleasure, I think, is a big thing, because our lives are so freaking busy and we juggle so many plates these days that it's so easy to just get so stressed, and just constantly be rushing to the next thing. So to try and weave in those little moments of pleasure and joy wherever you can is something that I continually try to bring myself back to. And even when I haven't had my mum's garden to forage in, I've always tried to find farmers markets when I was in London, or my neighbour's apple tree, or even foraging. I got really into foraging when I was in the UK, going on little different courses and learning about the different things that they had there as opposed to what I'd had here growing up. And then when I moved back to New Zealand, my mum helped me to plant a big garden. So when I was writing my book, I had quite a large garden and grew all the vegetables that you see in the recipes were all from my garden, from my mum's seeds, which was totally awesome. And I've tried to carry that on as much as I can. My garden actually isn't quite so big now because I realized what an epic mission it was, like 3 or 4 hours a day of like weeding and picking and planting and whatever.
With a baby
so
as
I've
well.
scaled it down a little bit, just realizing that I was perhaps being a little overambitious with a 1-year-old. But I try to grow all my own herbs and greens, as my gorgeous friend Natalie over there. It's like, if you can grow all your own greens and herbs, then you're doing good. And then the rest of my produce I get either from the local markets or the supermarket or whatever. But I do try, even if I'm shopping at the supermarket, to know what's in season and buy what's in season. Yeah, just because it's usually cheaper and it tastes better. Yeah.
How about you, Fiona?
Also-
What's your...
'Cause with the property that we bought was massively overgrown, so we've been slowly finding everything in it. But since we've had it, it had already an established orchard, so we have all our fruit comes from that, apart from bananas. That my husband sometimes gets a banana craving, so he goes and buys bananas.
Fair enough.
But so, and I do a lot of preserving, but because I also work full time, and you've only got so much time in the day, so I tend to do it in little amounts. And I do it a little bit geeky and have a spreadsheet. And so then I work out how much we use through the year, and you just do it
Great.
to the right amount. I have over chutneyed this year,
Yeah.
so we have got a few too many chutneys.
Yeah.
You don't eat as much as you think of
Yeah,
chutney,
yeah.
but it uses a lot of fruit and vegetables. And in terms of our vegetables, this year was probably the first year where I managed to get it better through the winter. It's that real realisation when you think, oh yeah, I'm going to plant a garden all year, but actually, because it stops growing, you have to plant everything back in spring, and it's harder in New Zealand because the best time to plant your winter garden is right when we're in Christmas. And so remembering to do it and having the time to do it when you haven't got
Or having
that can be a
space in
problem.
the garden.
And a space, yep, absolutely. And so, last year I did do that much better, and so we've had things through the winter, but we still use the supermarket, and I guess community is probably a big one for me. When you get people that we get on with our neighbours fantastically. So we buy our sheep, because we don't have our own sheep yet. We've just done the fencing, so we buy our sheep off them. And in the summer, they came over with cucumbers going, oh, we've got your cucumbers. And we're like, oh no, we have cucumbers coming out our ears. Very fortunately, we had some friends from in town, and they were like, yeah, we'll take cucumbers. So they could take the cucumbers. So I think community is pretty important. And even, when we first came to Nelson, and I had just 2 mussel rafts for our garden. So we just did the herbs and greens. It's even just amazing, people have excess food. You go, yeah, sure, I'll take it. I'll make apricot jam, and it's amazing if you're willing to take stuff. You usually get a load. I was surprised.
And I think there's some great community initiatives as well that can make use of that. And I've seen, community sort of food cupboards popping up. I don't think there's anything in Nelson, but where people can just go and take the excess produce or their chutneys and people can just go and swap or take. I'm not sure sort of in the long how they will work and without being vandalised and all that, but I hope that that they are left alone.
And we do have, in New Zealand we're so fortunate to have all those roadside stands.
Especially out your way.
And my husband said that he has had some Spanish visitors in the car, and they just loved it. They said, this wouldn't work where they lived in Spain. He said first all the food would just get taken. And first of all, the money box, obviously, that would go. Then all the food would get taken, and then the whole stand, they reckon, would go. So they were really jealous of what we have.
Wow. I can imagine the stand, so let's open it up to questions, because we've had some really great sort of subjects and topics we've touched on. And then if we've got time, we'll do some readings from the book. Great, thanks. So has anybody got a question to either? Yeah, great. or even if it's just something to add to what we've been talking about.
Thank you. This lovely, rich, delicious discussion going on here. Fiona, I want to come back to you and a comment that it was a bit of a throwaway, so I'd like to pick up on it about, and the cover of the book reveals it. Tell us about some of the future of, insects and their place on the plate that's emerging.
Well, it's definitely an interesting idea, and there are people. There's a great story about of people that are growing locusts and things. The lady that had done the dust, that we had, she is pitching it at high-end restaurants, following that pattern of if the rich people eat it, then everyone will follow suit, which I thought was a very interesting idea and quite cunning. So it will be interesting to see, because it has been a thing but we'll do it with the ocean. We're fine. We'll eat prawns, no worries. It'll be interesting to see how it comes about and how whether. Yeah, well, that's right.
I was asked to be the judge of a wild food festival 2 years ago. They didn't do it last year, and I was like, yeah, of course, awesome. And then when it got closer to the time, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I'm going to have to eat like wild pig's testicles and all sorts of weird wild things, but actually it wasn't too bad. It was like you know, some beautiful wild turkey, terrine, or it wasn't too unusual. But the one thing I did have to eat was someone had made tempura'd crickets with this beautiful lemon aioli sauce, and I was like, okay, I'm just not going to think about it. I'm just going to put it in my mouth and eat it, and just like not be like, oh. And it was actually quite nice. Tasted like peanuts. Nice and crunchy.
They eat them in
Yeah.
Thailand and many Asian
Absolutely.
countries, don't they? Yeah, the markets. Yeah, any other questions about, or even comments about sustainability, or no? Very quiet. Yeah, great.
I think it's quite obvious that everyone in the room here is on the same page, but my concern is the generations below who don't know where vegetables come from, where fruit comes from, how to cook things, and how, as a country, how do we solve that? I know things like Garden to Table in the schools are making a difference, but it's not funded by government or anything yet, and so that's my concern. And I don't know how we go about that.
A lot of schools do have their own programs as well. Both the schools that my kids have been at, they've had gardens that they've grown food and then cooked with the food. So, yeah, that's right. It is only off somebody deciding to do that.
That's right,
Yeah,
and you've got
it's
a
not at a
volunteer.
government level. Yeah,
Volunteer taking
absolutely.
it, and they get the children for half an hour every 2 weeks, and you've got to try and squash everything into it. I think there's just a whole generation below.
There absolutely is, and that's really good. I often wonder the same thing myself. So I can tell you something. I'm not sure if I should or not.
Too late now.
But too late now. So I've been having discussions with my mum about a few ideas that we're developing, but she informed me that apparently there actually is a registered government thing now, which is not really known to the public, but it's called the Future of Food. It's like a government think tank, and they are discussing these very questions. So it will be interesting to see what they come up with on a government level and how that influences our food security and food education and all sorts. But yeah, I guess it's just keeping the conversation alive and supporting people who are, like the Roebuck Farm, doing interesting things, and supporting children to get into food and the food industry and growing and agriculture, and keeping that culture
Or
alive.
the flip side of it, how kids don't tend to do what their parents do. It could actually come around by itself. If just thinking, our generation, when it came through with parents who had huge gardens and that sort of thing, and then probably for a good part of our life moved away from that and did this whole supermarket thing. So if they've had parents that do the supermarket thing, they might go, I'm going to rebel and grow my own things.
I just wanted to follow up on that. You've got is it a 1-year-old?
Yeah,
Does he help you in the garden?
absolutely.
See? And
Yeah.
Philip, what about your kids? I
Oh
bet
yeah,
they've
yeah.
been-
No, they know a lot about the garden,
You know-
but we're a
Well,
minority, unfortunately.
Well, true, but it's kind of really encouraging
Yeah.
kids to be part of it and put their hands in the dirt and love it and see where everything comes from. And like if we role model that makes a huge
Role model.
difference.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, just quickly before the next question. So my 1-year-old was at preschool the other day, and I was just telling Nicola on the way here, because there was some mint out by the thing, and I picked it, and I just love the smell of mint. And anyway, so I tell Frankie, she's a little girl, in the garden, she helps me pick all the herbs and things, and she knows the parsley and the mint and whatever. And so she was at preschool the other day, and there was a wild bunch of mint out the back of the little toddler area, and she went and picked a bunch and took it to her teacher and said, "Look, Danielle, mint." And they couldn't believe it. They were like, "What?
Yeah.
How does she know?" And they were like, "You will never believe what your daughter did today." And I was like, well, she does actually have a mint pot right by the door, and she walks past it 10 times a day, and it's just normal for her. So it's exactly.
There's a question there.
If supermarkets are really the main shopping area, surely supermarkets could do a lot more to show where food comes from. In the UK, where I live for part of every year, there has been a great deal of lobbying, and the response of the best supermarkets is to have a lot of posters around around all the different foods, and actually showing growers standing in fields or farmers with cows or milking things. So, because children do go around supermarkets on their own with parents, and just to have that kind of information around is assimilation for them. And I don't know what lobbying or pressures can be brought to bear on New Zealand supermarkets, but perhaps food writers can contribute to that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that, because it's immediately that saying springs to mind: if a picture tells 1,000 words. And so children are usually dragged around the supermarket, you know, like, come on, stay in the trolley, what are you doing? I've just got to get this 5 more things, you know. And so, yeah, they're not necessarily wanting, but they just, you know, with the mum, and the mum, it's usually, recently there was a campaign which triggered me to do a little research of what's the percentage of women and men who do the household food shopping, and it said apparently something like 86% is women doing the household food shopping. So, you know, quite often the kids are there too. And yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I think that the supermarket here, I mean, that is just so awesome. I literally want to go back to my supermarket in New World and Warkworth and just be like, right, come on, what are we doing? But yeah, it's kind of, it's so easy to go, well, who's going to do the connecting? You know, like, if the supermarkets are already raking in the dough, there's no incentive for them to kind of change anything. So who is going to do that, as you say? Yeah, so I think it's... Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, it's a very good question. I love it. And I think that I mean, even just on another level as well, it's like, I'm in the process at the moment of creating some food products, and I would love to be able to use all organic produce. But again, it's like the availability and the price point, getting more people to buy organic so that the price comes down, and getting subsidies for the organic farmers, not just the epic amounts of sprays that go onto commercial monoculture. You know, there's a whole range of things that need to start happening, and conversations that need to be brought to the forefront. But yeah, I definitely felt inspired to go back and approach my supermarket. I'm like, right, that's
well, the
it.
country of origin labelling is a bit of an issue, though. That's going to be no longer compulsory, though, fruit and vegetables. I'm not sure, but oh, sorry, I thought somebody was importing. Yeah.
Sorry. There's a whole lot of research now coming out about, you know, the healthy benefits of real food. You know, I can think of a TED talk that I've seen. The guy says, if there's one thing you're going to teach your children, teach them how to eat properly. So it's all coming back to what we put into our bodies, and all this research is showing how it benefits your gut, and that can benefit your mental health as well, because, you know, your feel-good hormones are in your gut and all that sort of stuff. So how can you see food writing becoming more collaborative with the research that is coming out, and you perhaps being able to influence mainstream, you know, general Joe blogs in that way
I think definitely, yeah. It's been really interesting because I've just been doing a lot of promotional stuff with my new book that's just come out, and I'm a little bit obsessed with the microbiome and gut health and stuff, just due to various health issues I've had myself, and through my research into my own body and how it works and how to kind of heal those various ailments, I've kind of feel like I've got to the root of it, in the sense that it's the gut that you really have to nurture and look after, which sort of controls everything. And even it's like the leading edge of science, and they're starting to discover that the state of your gut health can influence how your genes are expressed. You know, they're not a set thing. It's like you can actually change the way your genes express themselves through your gut, and what goes into your gut is not only food, but environmental factors, and also stress levels as well as a massive thing. But what's been interesting with this book is all the TV things I've done recently, they loved the book and they wanted to promote it, but the angle they all took was fermented food and gut health. So it's been really interesting seeing already that the media are picking up on various things and how they're. So that wasn't just a recipe they wanted, it was like, okay, the recipe and how that affects your gut health and mental health and stuff. So I think it really definitely is starting to come through, which is super awesome.
And the self-sustainability bit that the people I talked to said the same thing, that if you're growing your own, you just naturally eat more as well of the healthy food, just because you've got a lot of it, and you're more likely, you know, to throw in a whole thing of garlic rather than just one clove. And I mean, we found out obviously with the cucumbers, you'd put a whole cucumber in a salad rather than if you'd bought it from a supermarket. You might go, well, I'm going to use this half for this salad, and tomorrow we'll have this half, you know. So definitely, I think the more you grow, even yourself, you do end up having more, and it is a healthier lifestyle. And in terms of science, Susie Wiles has written a piece in this one about the future of food. So, and I mean, yeah, she's a science communicator. So again, it's that collaborative approach, definitely. I think everyone's voice together.
Mine is a comment really to say, look, I'm in my early 70s. I grew up in London with a wonderful mum who cooked nourishing but basic food, and who had one cookery book in the house, Bureau Cookery. And I think now, you know, we shouldn't worry too much about the next generation, because we have an avalanche of information through people like yourselves who are passionate about food and make that knowledge accessible to all of us, but also, you know, the internet and television and all of that. I think it's a real celebration, actually, that all that information is more and more available to ordinary people who don't have to spend lots of money getting courses, but can look it up for themselves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for all for coming, and thank you for Fiona and to Amber for talking about food.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Nicola, for chairing this session. We, of course, have copies of both Wild Delicious and Kai and Culture over in the Page and Blackmore bookshop. And we've also, I was really excited to see, got Nicola Galloway's new Homegrown Kitchen calendar for 2019, which must be hot off the press, is it?
Pretty much, yeah. About a week off the press, yeah.
As this is the last Readers and Writers session for the year, I can't believe it quite. I want to say a big thank you to Yanya, our sound person at the back, who's been absolutely amazing, and big smile on her face the whole way through. And to Bex and Jeremy and all their staff in the cafe. Woohoo! Yeah. And last but not least, by any stretch, is the volunteers, the ushers, who have been fantastic in supporting this event. So thank you to them as well. And yeah, thank you again to our panel. Please give them a big round of applause.